following program is a production of the Fairfax Network, Fairfax County Public Schools, funded in part by the Virginia Satellite Educational Network.
Hello there. Welcome to the MTA studio. I'm Della Kidd. Joining me today is award-winning children's author Doreen Rappaport. She'll be sharing her ideas about the writing process and discussing her books. Doreen, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
It's so wonderful to have you. Doreen's biographies focus on courageous people, some who are famous and some who are not, but all who are heroic. Here's a small sampling of her many book titles. The School is Not White, a true story of the civil rights movement. Martin's Big Words, the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We Are the Many, a picture book of American Indians. Abe's Honest Words, the life of Abraham Lincoln. And Eleanor, Quiet No More, the life of Eleanor Roosevelt. Doreen, we have a lot to talk about today. Let's get started. I have an email from Sam. And Sam would like to know who or what inspired you to start writing children's books about historical figures and events.
Well, Sam, in 1965, I was in Macomb, Mississippi, teaching in a freedom school, teaching black children who really didn't have a lot of the advantages that we have today. And living in the community during this time of segregation, there was a lot of danger going around. And what I met were wonderful, courageous, determined young men and women and children and grown-ups, black Americans who showed such courage that they inspired me and it made me think about American history and things I had never read about in American history. And I started to think about new stories that I wanted to write about and tell.
And Doreen, you've written about so many famous people, Abe Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., Eleanor Roosevelt, and you've written about people who are not so famous, the normal people like the Carter family that you wrote about in The School is Not White, a true story of the civil rights movement. How do you choose who you're going to write about?
Well, sometimes an editor asks me to write about someone, and sometimes I'm just in the course of my reading, I might discover someone. For example, I discovered the Carters reading the Sunday Times book review section about 10 years ago. There was a book about the Carters written for adults, and I was just blown away by their courage during this incredible time of segregation, and I became determined to write about them. But then I was busy with some other books, so what did I do? I clipped out that article and I put it in my file, and then a few years later, when I was looking through the file for some new ideas, I remembered the Carters, and I started to do research, find out who they were, so I could write about them.
Fascinating. Now, you've told us how you approach who you're going to write about. How do you approach the themes that you're going to write about?
I can't approach the themes until I do the research. In doing the book on Lady Liberty, I had no idea how I was going to tell the story. I had no idea it was going to turn out to be a biography of a statue. I had no idea that many different people would tell about their part in building the statue. But as I did the research and I read about Edouard Laboulaye, whose idea it was to give the present to the United States, and August Bartholdi, the sculptor, and Joseph Pulitzer, who raised money, and Marie Simon, who was an assistant sculptor, all of a sudden the theme of the book and how to tell the story, having these people tell the story, came to me. In doing Lincoln, I found out in doing research that Lincoln had started writing when he was a boy. And I decided what a great thing. I'd put Lincoln's words in, and kids would see what he wrote when he was young. Here's what he wrote, one of the first poems he ever wrote. Abraham Lincoln is my name, and with my pen I wrote the same. I wrote in both haste and speed, and left it here for fools to read. Well, I don't think he's a fool.
No, and I think we're just so completely fortunate that his poems still exist to this day.
And that's the wonderful thing about archives, that people save material and they have it cataloged, and we can go and use it.
And we use that for research, which leads me to my next question, because this is from Juliana, and her email question to you is you must do a lot of research to write your books. Can you please explain your process?
Juliana, I have to do a lot of research to write my books. I explained how I wrote Lady Liberty. I explained how I wrote Lincoln, doing all the research. For Dr. King, I read all of his speeches and interviews that had been published. I had read thousands of words, and again, I didn't know how I was going to tell the story. But then I read biographies of Dr. King written for adults, and then I read Dr. King's autobiography. And he told me how to write the book. He gave me the theme. He wrote he felt really terrible when he saw all those signs, colored, whites only. And then he remembered what his mother said, and she said, "You are as good as anyone." And he wrote in his autobiography being in church and hearing the words from the Bible and listening to the hymns and his father preach and deciding that when he was going to grow up, he was going to get big words too. And all of a sudden, the research led me to the theme and the way to tell the story. That's what's so great about research. The theme you'll find if you do your work.
And what other forms of primary research have you used?
Well, I've read letters by people. I read old newspaper articles. I go and read on microfilm from things from the 19th century. I read interviews. I interview people for the Carter family. I spoke with all of them. I sent them a list of questions and asked them to answer them. And then when I wasn't clear about the answer, I emailed them again or I called them up on the telephone. And I do a lot of digging in the archives.
We've talked some about primary resources and the learning that you must engage in as you're doing your research. Tell me more about what you learn as you're going through all the varieties of research that you experiment with. And
well,
that you
that's
explore.
one of the great. That's one of the great things. All the things I learned. For example, for years, I called the Native American man who helped the Pilgrims. I called him Squanto. I learned that is not his name.
I always
his
called him
name
Squanto
is really
too.
Tisquantum. And I realized, of course, that they gave him that nickname because as the Pilgrims listened to him speak, they didn't really understand what he was saying. Often people who speak a different language, a foreign language, we have trouble understanding, so we create our own version. And that kind of amazed me because he's such a central figure. And by the way, we're not really sure that that really is his full name. I also, I did a book on American Indians called We Are the Many, a picture book of American Indians. This book is the result of spending 3 or 4 years doing another book on a particular Indian woman. And I learned, I must have read 400 books to do that book on that woman, Redbird or Gertrude Bonham. I learned about Lone Dog. I learned about the whole process of the Dakota doing the winter count and having the pictographs and the stories. I learned about Osceola and how he fought for the people and how he wore the uniform. This is a wonderful thing that the artist could put in the picture because he wore a captured uniform when he was fighting the Americans and he really stood out. So the artist was able to use that too. I learned about the people I call the fabulous La Flèche family. There are 5 brothers and sisters. They all became very accomplished. And Susan La Flèche Picotte was a doctor on the reservation. And then 3 of my favorite women, Helena Conley, Ida Conley, and Lida Conley, they found out that their ancestors' cemetery was going to be razed. They were going to take the stones from it and they were going to take the bodies out. And what they did was they squatted in the cemetery for a year, stood guard over the cemetery until finally the town agreed not to do it. One day I'm going to write a novel on them. That
would be a story in itself, and I guess the lesson learned here is when you go down the path of research, you really don't know which path it's going to take you.
Absolutely, that is
fascinating.
That's the lesson.
And I believe I remember even that you even watched videos of of one of the ballerinas in your American Indian book.
I certainly did. Maria Tallchief.
Yes.
I watched her doing the Sugar Plum Fairy and the Nutcracker Suite.
On average, how long does it take you to conduct your research?
Well, Lady Liberty took me about a year. Eleanor took me about 7 months to research and write it. Martin I wrote in 3 months. I think it's because since I was involved in the civil rights movement, it kind of just flowed out of me. Now I'm working on a book on Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. I've been working on that for 7 years.
And you were telling me before we began the show that you've been traveling all around the world for your research on that one.
I've been traveling everywhere. I've just finished the first draft, and I've sent it off to the publisher, and I'm going to find out what the editor thinks soon.
So once you do your research, are you then ready to write?
Yes, I'm usually ready to write, but it's not always, doesn't always work so well the first time.
Particular challenges?
Particular challenge, finding the theme, writing too much. If you're writing for younger children, sometimes you put too many words in, being repetitious. I'm always waiting for the editor's letter when I send it in. And I want to make the point that when I say I send her in a first draft, it's not really a first draft. It's like my 10th time.
It's the first one they've seen.
It's the first one they've seen. Thank you.
Do you juggle more than one book at a time that you're writing?
I work on about 3 books at a time, because sometimes you get stuck on a book, and that helps me. If I get stuck on one book, I can go to another book, and then by the time I get stuck on that book, I can go back to the 3rd book that I was stuck on, and then when I work on that and I can't work on it any longer, I go back to that first book.
So when you've written your story, are you finished?
No, I'm not finished.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What about the publishing process and getting into a book?
Well, I think I'd like to read a letter
That would be
from one of
fantastic.
my editors. Now, this was for my book on Eleanor. This is when I sent in the book to her, and I have to tell you, I thought I'd done a great job, and she was going to write me back how wonderful it was. But she didn't think I was near the target at all. Here's part of what she wrote. Right now, I have to admit, I feel you're telling us all this rather than showing us. And you know, one of the big rules of writing is show, don't tell. Somehow we're still on the outside of Eleanor instead of right inside her very essence. Somehow she's still a mystery and she's a stranger. I'm not sure how to make her more accessible, but I'm very much looking forward to discussing this with you next week. And I want to tell you, when I got this, I was perplexed. I'm often perplexed the first time I get the letter. Takes me a little time to figure out what the editor meant.
And you know, students in the classroom, when they're writing something and they get these comments and they think they're finished and it's ready to go, and they have comments to help them along, it's similar to what you experienced with this letter.
It's very important that we not feel bad. And criticism is a wonderful thing to get. Here's a page from the Eleanor book. And you can see, oh my goodness, look at all these markings. Here's a page from the man who invented blue jeans. And you can see in pink and green the comments of the editor. This is a much better page, obviously. And this after I finished the book, and the artist does the art, and we see it. They send it back to me in Xerox form.
With
and
more
you
revisions.
Can see, no, these are the changes I am making.
Oh, okay.
Because the artwork sometimes lets me know I don't need all my words, and so I cut them out.
So you're reacting to what the illustrator has interpreted
I'm
from your
reacting.
words.
It's a collaboration between picture and text, and the artist also reacts to my words.
Well, now, obviously, the editor critiques your books. Does anyone else critique your books for you?
Well, students critique my book. I took my book on John F. Kennedy, called Jack's Path of Courage, into a 4th grade class in Brooklyn, and they ripped it apart in the best way possible, telling me what were my strengths and my weaknesses. And I sent them back the draft, and they had more comments, and they sent it to me. And I think with their help, I'm really more on target. My editor was very impressed with their editing.
Well, that was a valuable process for both of you.
Very valuable. And you know, I always thank everybody in the front of the book. They'll be thanked in the front of the book.
Good for them. Well, using the books Eleanor, Quiet No More, and Martin's Big Words, teacher Cheryl Mallon prepared a class activity for her 3rd grade students at Providence Elementary School. Let's take a look. When we return, more book talk with author Doreen Rappaport. We'll be right back.
MTA Bookmarks.
The research is particularly important, though, for historical fiction. It is fiction, but it is indeed historical.
MTA Bookmarks. MTA Bookmarks only on Meet the Author. Meet the author and get the full story, the backstory,
You guys are actually the first to know about this. I haven't even told my editor about this idea.
the revised story, the author's story,
You just do it. You read, you watch, and you write.
and sometimes quite a story.
Writing isn't a job. It's a way of looking at the world and meeting new people.
Meet the Author, a production of the Fairfax Network.
Author Doreen Rappaport has published dozens of nonfiction books for children. Hi, I'm Catherine. In high school, I read a lot of biographies, but biographies are also a good nonfiction choice for younger readers. As a student reporter for Meet the Author, I wanted to see how young readers learn from the biographies they read in class. I found out that it's all about the big words.
Learn something new every day. Stand up for yourself. Treat others fairly. Play safe. Don't make fun of people's legends or skin. Keep trying.
After reading some famous quotes in Doreen Rappaport's biographies, Cheryl Mallon's third grade students learned about the power of words. They were then inspired to write their own big ideas and words on paper. You see, big words can motivate, inspire, and strengthen people. They are also a way for students to discover themselves and to relate to what other people are thinking.
Everybody is the same in their own way. Do your best all the time. Read every day to get better. Courage and have hope in others.
Teachers are choosing to use more nonfiction books, like biographies, in the classroom. These books enhance language arts skills and give students a sense of what life was like in a different time period. And the kids came up with some pretty deep ideas and advice.
Trust yourself. Practice every day. Try your best on work. Do things every day that scares you. Do the best all the time. Be powerful. Strive to your highest point. Try your best.
Empowering words from some pint-sized students. Reporting for Meet the Author, I'm Catherine. Signing off until next time.
Cheryl Mallon and her students, that was a wonderful lesson that they had at Providence Elementary School.
It makes me feel incredibly happy to see that the book is being used and the children are being involved. That's really why I write these books.
It must be quite gratifying for an author.
It is.
Now, let's move on to the illustrations. You can't miss the unique illustrations that your books reflect. They're
I have
wonderful.
been blessed with these wonderful illustrators.
Tell me about how it is to work with an illustrator.
Well, I work very closely with these illustrators on Freedom River. Brian Collier did absolutely beautiful collages. He also paints the hands and body parts and faces with watercolor. And what happens is I get to see the work as it's in progress, and I make comments on it. The illumination of blue, because the story takes place at night during a slave escape, is such a brilliant touch by Brian. And then there is Martin's Big Words, which Brian also did with that wonderful smile of Dr. King's on the cover that brings everybody into it. And the lone bus, the Montgomery bus boycott the first day, the long bus. You can only see part of it, I think, on the screen now, but the bus seems to go on forever. And then there is Martin praying, because Martin was a minister, a man of God, and he believed that the movement was so centered around God and that God was with them. And there's a wonderful glow of the sky and the sun coming through in light, which is so moving when he's praying in this book.
It's a very dramatic picture.
It is a very dramatic picture. The School Is Not White by Curtis James. He really captured the family, I think, and their struggles. And I love the one of them going on the shiny yellow bus. All the kids mentioned when they wrote about their experience, this shiny yellow bus, and he really captured it. And then there's Abe's Honest Words. And it's very interesting in the Abraham Lincoln book. I want to talk for a second about the cover, which is, of course, Lincoln. And it's Lincoln with the flag in back of him. But let's for a minute take a look at the back of the cover, which is where you get the title, Abe's Honest Words. And the graphic designer is responsible for the red, white, and blue of this effect, completing the flag. I also think there's great power and struggle and poignancy in the image of the slaves picking cotton in the fields. And there's a wonderful blue sky illuminating them. And there's the disheveled Lincoln. hair a little bit askew, giving the Gettysburg Address. That is what Lincoln was like. He was a little bit disheveled. And Gary Kelly got a completely different effect for the book on Eleanor Roosevelt. She starts in the Victorian era, and she kind of goes through the 20s and 30s, which is Art Deco, and then moves into the 50s. He really captured her intensity and commitment when you see her at the UN listening to the translations of the other delegates and how intense she was on trying to understand what they were saying. And in Lady Liberty, what I love is Matt's perspective in the studio, building the Statue of Liberty, capturing that arm and the copper being banged down so it's thin, and then of course the men hanging from the ropes as they're putting up the skeleton is up and they're banging in the copper on the Statue of Liberty. The perspective is just fantastic. You feel like you're floating there with them in space.
Describe how you interact with your illustrators. Do you work side by side with them? Do you all communicate back and forth?
No, I get the sketches and I send my comments directly to my editor, who shares them with the art director, and they have their comments and they put all the comments together and then they send it to the artist. Sometimes we might have a difference of opinion on something, and in the Statue of Liberty book, Matt did a painting for Pulitzer that I didn't think captured the essence of Pulitzer, who himself was an immigrant and helped raise all the money for the Statue of Liberty. And I wrote a very, very long email to my editor. And I don't know if she sent it exactly the way I wrote it, but she sent it to Matt. He thought about it and came up with another sketch. And I think the painting of Joseph Pulitzer is one of the most beautiful in the book. So I get an input. I'm really very lucky to get input and respect from the artists who know a great deal more than I do about their field.
Doreen, let's go back to some of our email questions. This question is from our third graders that were featured in the video, and they want to know, do you write your books to entertain, to persuade, or to inform?
This is a great
wonderful
question, and I write my books for all three reasons. If they are not entertaining, you won't read them, kids. I know that. But I am trying in a way to persuade you to understand how courageous people can be and persistent, and that you can do what these people do too. So the answer is all three reasons.
Wonderful question. They also asked, why did you choose to write Martin's Big Words?
I chose to write Martin's Big Words because my editor felt that there were no books about Dr. King that presented, for kids, that presented his philosophy. And I was a little bit worried that I wouldn't be able to do it, but I also wrote it because I have great admiration for Dr. King. His policy of nonviolence and the courage shown by the black Southerners is a great example for all Americans on how we can resolve our differences.
Doreen, is there a connection in your books, Martin's Big Words, Eleanor Quiet No More, and Abe's Honest Words?
They're all about the same thing. I write about people struggling to be empowered. All my books have the same theme.
The next email question is from Jackson. Jackson would like to know, did you like to read when you were a kid? And if so, what type of books did you enjoy reading?
I loved to read when I was a kid. I still read my book, If I Were Going, from the Alice and Jerry books about the postmaster from Friendly Village who traveled around the world, and I love to travel because of that book. And I still read a collection of books called My Book House, which starts in the nursery and goes all the way across the sea. And I loved Anne of Green Gables when I got older.
Absolutely. As an adult now, who are some of your favorite authors?
Jean le Carré, I just love. I love Toni Morrison. There's so many authors who I really love. Alice Sebold, I really love some of the new writers. I love to read poetry. I love to read stories of conflicts, and I also read a lot of nonfiction.
Well, Jamie would like to know, what do you like most about writing books?
I like the puzzle of figuring out how to tell the story. I want to say that it's not easy to do this, but it's a great puzzle, and you feel so good when you are finished and get it right.
This is from Andrew. Andrew wants to know, what was your favorite subject in school?
Mathematics.
And that's not what someone would expect you to answer, is it?
I loved math. I thought I might study math in college, but I studied music instead, and then I drifted into writing.
We have another question from our group of third graders that we saw earlier in the broadcast. Do you have a favorite book that you've written?
The favorite book is the book you're working on, because if you are going to spend 7 months writing a book, a year writing a book, and now I've got a book I've been working on for 7 years, you'd better like that book. It's got to be your favorite the day you're working on it.
Doreen, any surprises in your book?
Well, here's a great surprise that happened. About a week ago, I got in the mail Abe's Honest Words, which has been translated into Japanese. The translator sent it to me. And you notice, if you can remember, that the Abe book that we have,
there are no words on the
There are no words on the front, but of course, Japanese children and adults may not recognize our wonderful Abe Lincoln, so they put the title on the front and they put the English on the back. And it's very exciting because every page has the Japanese on it. My words and Abraham Lincoln's words, all in Japanese. And I'm sure I'm going to be going to some schools where there will be children who will read this book to me. I'm really looking forward to it.
We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, what advice do you have for those budding writers out there that might be watching?
Keep writing, be brave, and rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. And don't give up. Follow your dream.
Wonderful advice. It has been a pleasure having you today,
Oh,
Doreen.
thank you for inviting me. I had a wonderful time.
I've learned so much. Our guest today has been author Doreen Rappaport. If you would like to learn more about her books, Google Doreen Rappaport. And to learn more about our programming, visit us at www.fcps.edu/Fairfax Network. For the Fairfax Network, I'm Della Kidd. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep dreaming.